Okay, so now I'd like to invite Anna Bario up to give a presentation on responsible retail. So yesterday somebody asked a question, well, how does this work at retail? And remember we talked yesterday about how we're always saying it's out there somewhere, the answer. Well, some people just tackle it. And Bario Neal is one of those companies. So let's learn more about how they've approached the challenges of responsible retail.
Hi. First of all, I have to say I love Radical Jewelry Makeover so much. It's such a wonderful project and so fun to see all that work. So thanks to you guys for bringing it here. So Susan asked me to talk about responsible retail and how to incorporate the mission of responsible jewelry into the DNA of your brand. And Bario Neal has been around since about 2008. It's a brand that I started with a dear friend of mine from college, and we really were we were both coming to jewelry from different perspectives. I had studied environmental science and psychology, and Paige was a sort of sculpture major, and we were in our very early 20s, and making jewelry and sort of working so intimately with these materials, like we see those students from So Fresh and So Clean, and just running into these questions of where is this gold from, and kind of hitting a brick wall. There was, at that point, so little information, and we're talking kind of 2006 at this point when we're starting to kind of ideate. There were some refineries that were doing 100% recycled, but for us to say, this gold is from this mine in Peru, like that was just impossible at that point, unless we were, basically reprocessing heirloom gold, and then of course we only knew its most recent past life. So we're thinking about how jewelry embodies so much in our cultures and in our lives, and how we could harness that imbued value to create social and planetary benefit. We're very young, we want to do something creative, and we want to do something with a social justice mission and an environmental mission, and how do we, in this very grand way, try to bring all these things together? And jewelry was kind of our answer to attempting that. We really wanted to create a model for a brand that could create that value rather than just focus on extraction and consumption. None of this is to say that we've achieved that. I think that we all know in this room that this is a learning practice for all of us, and we try to get better every day. There's no sort of destination, but this is sort of what we've learned and where we've landed with our process. So when we began to envision Bario Neal, we were independent designers asking questions about where our gold and gemstones were mined and by whom. We were really drawn to the imaginative possibilities of jewelry. It represents so much for us in our lives and in our work, and we were disillusioned by industry practices that ignored the risks and realities of metal and gemstone mining and manufacturing. And again, this is sort of the mid-aughts, and at that point, traceability was so much more challenging, especially for emerging designers. There was literally, for us it felt like absolutely no information that we could access, short of reaching out to a lot of mentors who are in this room. So I think that, for us, we were able to really grow out of this community of jewelers and NGOs and miners and participants in this responsible jewelry supply chain, because in the very beginning we were really just kind of searching around for anyone we could contact, and Ethical Metalsmiths was one of the first. At that point, I think it was sort of the three original founders who were able to point us kind of in the right direction. And we were really fortunate that our first experience of the jewelry industry was actually the Madison Dialogue conference, I think at the World Bank in DC, probably 2007. But it was this incredible, eye-opening experience where we got to meet with representatives from ARM, developing the Fair Mine Standard. We got to meet with representatives of Tawoma and artisanal gold miners from Peru, and sort of start our education from the perspective of ASM, which really, for us, it sort of created a parallel thread of, small independent jewelers, artisanal, as we use the term in the US, from a craft perspective, jewelers being able to, communicate in parallel with small-scale and artisanal miners, because we have the relationships with our clients, with our customers, to tell these stories, right? Like, our work is to tell the sort of personal stories that come with this jewelry, but also to tell the origin stories that come with this jewelry, and the sort of history, the material history, that imbues it with so much more value as well. This is a kind of gratuitous, embarrassing picture of Paige and I in our first studio. I think we're maybe 21 at that point. But just to show, I think that that there has been certainly so much development in this space, but also in terms of our ability to integrate responsible sourcing into the DNA of our brand. We were so fortunate to find mentorship in this jewelry community of folks who were able to really teach us and bring us along, suppliers who were able to teach us and bring us along, and really help us sort of grow into the brand that we did. Go back here. Sorry, it's showing me different slides here than it is here, so I'm just aligning. So we actually started out really with a focus on vintage and reclaimed materials. So like truly vintage enamel chains, reclaimed precious metals, Canadian and Australian diamonds, traceable materials, but really with a focus on reclaimed. And this was actually before the first US fair mined gold import, which we were participating in. But very early on, sort of a different focus in terms of what was available to us. So after several years of growth, we sort of we're based in Philly. We grew into a storefront. We had developed really good relationships with suppliers. We had a set of parameters internally that helped us to define what newly sourced or reclaimed materials we wanted to work with, what traceability information we needed to document the chain of custody or provenance. And we felt like we had kind of a grip on a set of materials that we were confident in working with and communicating to our customers that they were responsibly sourced, and to the best of our ability, the sort of best practices available. But we wanted to go further, and we wanted to have a consistent process that would allow us to bring in new materials and evaluate existing materials to ensure we were kind of living up to our own expectations and enable us to share information about responsible sourcing more clearly. So this is sort of where we were, probably 5 years ago with the materials that we had sort of, broad strokes, evaluated as offering in our collections. And then, let's see. And then in 2019, after about a decade of building those relationships, we actually reached out to Christina Miller, and we sort of said, we want to take this further. We've looked at a lot of certifications. There's nothing that feels like it really aligns with the work that we are doing and the direction that we want to kind of push it further as an independent small jeweler. And how can we sort of how can we codify this process and make it tangible and make it something that we can really ground in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in the OECD due diligence, and how can we really sort of capture the work that we're already doing and really improve on it, right? Give it a much firmer footing in sort of universally understood best practices. So our process now includes a code of conduct, which we share out to all of our supplier and manufacturer partners, a series of supplier interviews, and an 8-step process to determine whether this partner or the specific material. It's not that we evaluate every supplier and say we can't work with any of your material. We talk to them and we say, okay, well, this material works for us, and then we have the same process for any claim they might be making about a certain gemstone type, let's say. So it's a pretty involved process, and I think the best way to sort of guide you through it is to talk through our sustainability reports. So in 2020, we released our first biannual sustainability report. At that point, and I think probably still today, we're the only small independent jeweler to release this. And it covers quite a bit. So I'm going to kind of walk you through 2022's report, which we just released fairly recently. The report is really a culmination of all the work that goes on over the course of those 2 years. So it's everything from how we source our materials, how we track that information, what energy we use at any of our locations. We're not just documenting gemstone inventory by origin or mine or miner in some case, but also, maintaining that data so that we can analyze it by country of origin and cutting facility and things like that, and how much we're spending on each origin so that we can sort of set goals moving forward. So this is kind of, an introduction to the materials that we're working with in the sustainability report, highlighting, really what we value. Bario Neal has always been based in a bespoke production model, so we don't actually create inventory. We don't hold inventory, really, for anything that we haven't sold. There are a few exceptions for that, but for the most part, we make everything to order. We run our own workshop in Philadelphia. We make our own jewelry. It allows us to, first of all, make incredible jewelry that's really designed for each client. But it also means that we're sort of low waste or no waste, right? So we're not making things that don't have an intended use. And that's something that we really value. We also do a lot with heirloom gemstones and diamonds in particular. I think the best possible story, or the most complicated possible story for a lot of clients, is working with materials they already have. So how do we incorporate, obviously, not just minerals that are already above ground, but that are already above ground and belong to the client that wants to create a new piece of jewelry. So again, just sort of reiterating, our commitments in the sustainability report. Communicating with and being able to educate our customers has always been really integral to our brand. When we first started learning about these issues in jewelry, again, before we even really made any jewelry, we got so excited about responsible sourcing and, started a blog, and we're sort of sharing everything that we learned and, teaching at local schools and universities. And we really felt like our role as jewelers was to, it reminds me of what Pauline said yesterday, to sort of be, in some sense, a conduit of source intelligence to that market intelligence, but for the customer. And so, have really always tried not to force this information on our customers, because we all know they're coming from they're all coming from different places and seeking different degrees of depth, but to make it available. And so I'll talk a little bit later about how we do that in our sort of digital presentation to customers, but that's always been, really a part of the work that we see ourselves doing. Another element of the sustainability report is just sort of talking about, progress, right? Like we haven't achieved any sort of, sustainability is kind of a bogus word, right? When we really think about what we're doing, we haven't achieved some final destination. We're always working towards improving the work that we're doing. And so part of what we get to do here is kind of talk about the things that we're really proud of from the last few years. And then sort of talk about, again, some of the wins. I was talking with some colleagues the other day, one of the great accomplishments of the last couple of years is that we increased the percentage of Fairmine Gold that we're selling by 93%. Through pretty simple tactics, like making that the default option. We have a lot of customers that really like that are also, that really find reclaimed precious metals appealing as well. But we thought, hey, if we just start with fair minds, will that change behavior? And it really has for us. So that's been excellent. So our code of conduct is really a starting point for us in terms of laying the groundwork of the things that we value, right, at Bario Neal. So it goes into legal compliance, ethics and integrity, management systems, child labor, forced or compulsory labor, health and safety, discrimination, disciplinary practices, et cetera, et cetera. This is a document that we ask all of our supplier and manufacturer partners to acknowledge, right? They're not signing. There is no binding agreement with this, but it lays out our expectations. Also with the acknowledgement that we are a very small company, right? Like we are not able, some of these goals, right, might ask, like, do you have a specific compliance officer for X, Y, or Z? And, we're a company of 18 or 20 people, like, we have a designated person responsible for that, but that's not their entire role. So, obviously with all of this, we're really understanding the balance of intent and also capacity. So certainly, it's all sort of in the context of development and capability. So our supplier evaluation process is an 8-step process. First, suppliers review and sign our code of conduct. Secondly, we do our own internal review based on publicly available information, just even looking at a supplier's website or any other reporting that they might publish. We look at, assessing suppliers on legality, anti-money laundering, management systems, sourcing practices, environmental performance, and other key criteria. And we have a long conversation, which, from reading this, I want to emphasize that it's not an interrogation. It's a relationship building conversation. So it's really a way for us to, sure, we might be asking 65 questions in that conversation, but it's also a space for us to say, how did you start your company? Why are you interested in gemstones or gold? What is your passion here? What are the projects you're working on that might be, might not have anything to do with the gemstones that we're purchasing from you, but that you really care about and really have, a social or environmental benefit that we can support, right? So it's really an opportunity for relationship building and trust building as much as anything else. And then, after we sort of have those conversations, we might ask for supporting documentation. Your claim is that you're sourcing these gemstones from this country or this region or this mine. Do you have a redacted invoice that you can share with us? Do you have, import documents? What are the things that can sort of give us even more confidence so that we know when we're passing this information along that we've sort of done our due diligence? And then we have this sort of internal rating system, right? So for each one of the questions that we might ask a supplier, even though it's a long narrative answer and we're taking copious notes, we sort of have trained a few members of our team to go through and say, okay, this response, gets a 0 or a 1 or a 2. And then at the end of all of that, we're able to sort of come up with a metric that says, okay, this supplier is, coming in green or yellow or orange or red. And by the time we get to that point, if somebody's coming in at red, like many processes have failed, and that rarely happens. But it allows us to sort of not just have a consistent process for how we onboard and work with suppliers, but really to say, this partner is excellent at this aspect, and, we'd love to sort of improve something here, right? So it allows us to sort of look at everybody on a more even playing field. And, for the most part, there are opportunities for us to say, this is our stumbling block to be working together, right? And to sort of deepen or increase that partnership. Or we say, like, whoa, this is something we had no idea about, and that ends the relationship. But that's really never, that's happened maybe once in the course of this process where something was revealed. And that's important that those red flags happen, right? If we weren't doing that, then we wouldn't be catching what we're looking for. But yeah, so then we sort of are able to rate those suppliers and if there are issues, work with them to sort of move towards rating in the sort of green category, or else separate ways, and then we sort of share that information in these reports. So here's an example of, ratings from 21 and 22. And overall, 94% of our metals and gemstone suppliers scored green on our scale. And again, this is sort of a reminder that capacity and intent, on our part and on the part of our partners, is so essential. And I think, as we've heard, even Will say yesterday talking about silver, like, the benefit of being an independent designer is that you're agile, you can change your supply chain, you can be an on-ramp, right? You can say, like, I'm not reporting to anyone but myself, right? And my customers. But so I can partner with a new material and try to bring this to market in a way that really supports the development of this product. And I think that's an incredible potential that we have. Reiterating the core values that we operate on: human rights, obviously, transparency and responsibility, and environmental impact. So one of our goals for our next coming couple years is to work towards a climate neutral certification. Conscientious design and craft, I think one thing that's always been really important to us is, the responsibility of being in a community of artists, right, of makers, and seeing ourselves, even as we continue to develop the brand, as being part of, conscientious craft, right? Like all the work that we saw being discussed with the Radical Jewelry Makeover, that every element of the way that you make a piece of jewelry should really reflect, first of all, the honor that it is to make an object that someone wears every day, right? Just the basic reality of being a jeweler is like an incredible privilege. And I think also one of the things that lands for me so often is that we get to be makers in a space where the materials we work with are universally understood to never be waste. Like that, over fashion or other industries, like we have such an incredible benefit there that we're working with something that, everyone understands has a life cycle that is, centuries long. Inclusivity has also been, a constant value for us. When we sort of first launched, we were actually kind of a bridge fashion wholesale brand. before the 2008 recession, and we were working with a lot of international accounts, really entirely wholesale. And after the recession, we sort of realized we had to pivot to fine jewelry wedding engagement. And a big barrier for us was just the culture of the wedding industry. We didn't want to be a part of it. And so inclusivity became a really big piece of how we were going to enter the wedding industry kind of on our own terms. And this is kind of our team, I guess, last year at our New York store. Just briefly, I want to kind of talk about digital and brick and mortar design in terms of retail. So one of the things that we've designed in our digital experience really is kind of looking at responsible sourcing information as a choose your own adventure, right? So you're a customer coming to our website. Maybe you just want to know that we are sourcing responsibly. Great. And then you move on and you look at beautiful jewelry. That's there for you, right? But if you want to dig in and you say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about these materials that you work with, and then you get, another sort of paragraph of information, and then you're like, oh no, I actually still want to learn more, then we link out to a blog where we have a number of articles about every material that we work with, and here's the story of the Sri Lankan sapphires that we're using in custom cutting, and here's the story of our Montana sapphires, and sort of breaking out all of that information in greater narrative depth than we can on a single sourcing page. And that translates into brick and mortar. This is our sort of flagship store in Philly before we renovated. We really focused on sustainable materials in that renovation process. So everything from flooring to, displays, working with local artists and, as sustainable materials as we could. In terms of our showroom design as well. So these are some photos after our renovation. You can see we have kind of like decals on the wall, talking about the work that we do from a sourcing perspective. This is part of our workshop upstairs. Is this one gonna load? And this is a customer testimonial. I don't know if this video is going to work automatically. Should we skip it?
I was really pulled and still am to the consciousness of the brand, the way that they work with suppliers and the impact that they're having on the world around them. Just being able to support a business that is so very much rooted in, ethical consumption and human rights is another huge piece of it. I just felt that every dime that I was spending was truly impacting the world in a positive way, but also fulfilling the needs of the craftspeople that were a part of that process. And that was something that I could get behind, and I still do today.
Thanks. This is just another look at sort of how heirlooms can tell an incredible story. It's something that we really like to pair heirlooms with newly mined, responsibly sourced gemstones, or vintage gemstones even, and fair mined gold, and all of these materials where we can sort of say, like, here are all of these incredible stories, and here are the ways that we can integrate them. So again, just looking at our work as a form of storytelling, both as designers, but also as manufacturers. I'm going to skip this as another video of our packaging design, but I'll just say we did this custom porcelain ring box. We couldn't find great partners for materials that we loved years ago when we did our last round of sort of packaging design, and so in an effort to make it more sustainable, we actually worked with local ceramic artists and designed this sort of porcelain object as a ring box. It's very minimally branded, which I think people really like, and allows it to be sort of another object that's part of the experience. This is just a fun one. So much of our design really is in layouts. We're kind of known for these like crazy cluster rings, but part of that communication is certainly where each of these stones is sourced, but also just like in that conversation with clients, I think it's so much fun to just see their thoughts drawn out on top of the design work that we do. And then kind of to close, I think there were some really interesting conversations yesterday about, what customers are asking for, right, what they want. We certainly have a lot of anecdotal and more database information on what our customers want, right? And we've kind of taken that in the direction of offering as many best options as we can, right? Offering a lot of choices, all of which we feel really excited and confident about. There have also been a lot of conversations recently about recycled or repurposed or reprocessed or reclaimed precious metals, and the sort of true cost of a lot of responsibly sourced materials. There was a conversation yesterday about fair mined gold and how we can think about the alignment of that pricing, and this is just sort of an idea that's been bouncing around for us at Bario Neal, but what if we had the opportunity, especially as independent jewelers, to create price parity between reclaimed precious metals and fair mined and say, no, it all costs this much, but we're going to voluntarily add a premium to the reclaimed precious metals that some of our clients really do want, and work with projects like Friends of the Inyo, which was an excellent living room session, right? Defending indigenous lands and public lands against new mining projects in the US, in the Eastern Sierra. What if we could create that premium ourselves and say, look, no, these actually cost the same, right? But you have a choice, and we're going to create some kind of benefit through these material purchases however we can, right? Whether or not that's built into the material cost itself, that's an opportunity that we have. We're always looking not to do less harm, but to do more good, right? And so maybe that's a place that we can have a conversation about, creating that potential and that price parity. Yeah. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
But I imagine people have questions for you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was so impressive to see. I was curious if you could give some advice for other small businesses. Your sustainability report is so impressive. And I know larger companies have someone like head of sustainability. How do you approach that as a small business? Like, Is that something you and Paige do, or do you have a employee who's solely in charge of that? Like, what is your approach to that?
It's me. And it's also, our gemstone sourcing coordinator is in charge of data tracking for, obviously inventory, but also all of this information, all of our sourcing information. Our administrative director tracks all of our energy bills. It's sort of spread out in terms of, across the 2-year period, which was, for us, it was really essential that we just can't do this every year. It's a lot of work, right? But, we were able to kind of spread it around a little bit in terms of the ongoing work. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I learned something new about you, which is always a pleasure. My question is, I guess 2 questions. First, what's your most popular offering? Like gold and gems and then diamonds or other, specific offerings therein. And then what are the materials that consumers still kind of have questions about? Despite, all the information, there's still something's there. Like they just, if you can just kind of talk about maybe those, what people love and what people still have questions about.
Sure. For us, what people love are really, it's a mix of, usually we're working in 14 karat gold, fair mined, or reclaimed. And then a mix of diamond and gemstones. That's really, that's kind of, we're known for these designs that are kind of asymmetrical clusters, like constellations of many different things. A lot of that is custom. So we do a ton of custom design. So it's coming in and working one-on-one with clients and talking about, not just the materials that they're drawn to, but why. And that gets into, okay, this represents this for me in my own life, but also, let's talk about the origins of this material, and let's talk about where this comes from and how that ties into that story. In terms of materials that people have questions about, certainly lab grown. I think that's where we're having the most conversations is people coming in and saying like, but really tell me, like what would you buy for your sister, So I think that's where people kind of are having the stickier conversations and trying to really understand what they value. I think the way that we try to guide those conversations is like, it's what you care about. Like, here's what we think is great about this material or this material. Here's what we can say that it does in the world or doesn't do in the world, and what resonates for you.
And I coach retail jewelers all the time about having conversations with their suppliers, and many of them are absolutely terrified of it because they're afraid of losing the supplier or they're afraid of ruining the relationship. Can you talk a little bit more about how you do that without losing your supplier?
Yeah,
or maybe sometimes you do.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of people in this room. I think when we first started, like I was really scared. I was like, oh, this is like antagonistic. I'm asking people questions that might, feel like they're trying to find a hole or trying to get, and that's not the nature of the conversation, I think if you approach it as like, look, we're all trying to do something, we're all trying to do the best at what we do, and how can you help me understand your work, right? Like, teach me about the work that you do. Everybody loves to talk about the work that they do, they have pride in it, and I think approaching those conversations as just like, these are the facts that we need to understand together. I think, and just practicing, I think having it as like seeing it as a partnership, right? That like you're already in part, especially I think for clients of yours that are afraid of losing a supplier, it's like, no, they're already your partner. You're already in business together. So it's like, hey, we're here to solve this problem together. We're not here to like pick apart our relationship.
Thanks for a great presentation. You mentioned, of course, that when you were starting out with the business in 2008, the industry landscape was very different, and there were very limited options for you in terms of information and sourcing. So if someone was starting or emulating the type of business that you've created and starting that now, what would you say would be the one thing that they have now that you didn't have then that would have really helped you back in those days? And then maybe related to that, over the last 15 years, what would you see as the thing that you've done which was like your greatest moment of success, your greatest triumph, where you think, yeah, that was really tough, but we absolutely nailed it?
Thanks, Stuart. I think, first of all, being able to come to events like this and go to the Ethical Gem Boutique tomorrow, like if we could have walked into a room and found all of these suppliers that, at least were a starting point for us to work with, like what a gift that would have been. I mean, would have saved us like 8 years of work. So yeah, I think, I think that, certainly being a part of this community was really how we were able to build our processes and our responsible sourcing processes the way that we did. And, learning from, a lot of the organizations that were involved. And, in an amazing way and in a frustrating way, it's kind of still the same people in the room that were here 15 years ago. But your second question was, what was one of our greatest accomplishment or one of our sort of successes? I look back very fondly on the first import of Fairmined Gold 10 years ago, where it was just, I think we tried really hard to just support that process happening, and it was like, is it gonna make it across the border? Like, it was just figuring out that process felt like a really big first hurdle for a lot of us, and then to be able to work with Fairmined. So I think that's definitely one that I remember quite well.
We're going to take one last question. It's from our virtual audience. So Joy says, hi, you spoke about the fact that no certification really resonated with you. Which certifications were you talking about? And do you think B Corp certification could be a valid one?
Great question. I'll say in full transparency, we haven't looked at B Corp in a few years. I would love B Corp I would have loved B Corp to reconsider kind of how global trade is treated, right? Like even if we're partnering with a women's cooperative in Tanzania, or even if we're sourcing from Moyo or Virtue, the distance of those relationships was really penalized the last time that we looked at B Corp certification. So that was sort of one of the hindrances there. RJC does not feel applicable to independent jewelers like us. That's sort of what was, the landscape is not full of potential certifications that felt really aligned with what we were proud of talking about. And that was why we sort of decided to develop our own process, which would not have been our first choice, right? We would love to have a standardized process that wasn't ours. We don't want to manage this internally, but we felt like that was the best choice for now, for us.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you, Anna. We have to